The cold wind cut my face like sharp blades on that gray afternoon. The sky, a curtain of dense clouds, seemed to weigh down the abandoned cemetery. Footsteps echoed over the broken stones and forgotten graves, but it wasn't my own footsteps that disturbed me. It was the silence, the absolute silence that whispered stories of lives no one remembered. My hands trembled, not from fear but from memory. The ground was damp, covered in dry leaves and twigs that creaked under the weight of each footstep. As I entered through the rusty gate, a sense of disorientation overcame me. There was something strange in the air, a mixture of wet earth, ancient metal, and a scent that seemed to carry echoes of past battles, of spilled blood, of lives cut short before their time. Every cracked tombstone, every crooked cross seemed to watch me, as if the dead knew who I was. My old uniform, hidden under a worn overcoat, seemed to protect me, but also betray me. There was no one there, at least apparently. As I walked, I noticed the uneven ground marked by shoe prints that weren't mine, as if someone had recently passed by but vanished without a trace. My heart raced. Not from irrational fear, but from the memory of warnings, gunshots, and the shrill sound of explosions that still echoed in my mind. I could almost hear the whisper of voices from those no longer there, calling my name, asking if I still remembered. An owl, enormous and silent, took flight from a nearby grave, its black wings cutting through the heavy air. And in that instant, something made me freeze. A sound, or was it just my imagination? Of soft, light footsteps, following my every move. I didn't turn my head immediately. Every fiber of my being was alert. My past didn't surprise me. I'd learned to expect the unexpected. But this place felt alive in a different way. There was no war here, but a silent battle between forgetting and memory. The air grew thicker, and my senses, sharpened by years of death, seeming ever-present, caught the smallest detail. A slightly shifted stone, the echo of a sigh that wasn't my own, the creak of the gate slowly closing behind me. A shiver ran down my spine. This cemetery, forgotten by all, was now my battlefield. But it wasn't against a human enemy. It was against something deeper, something that tested my sanity, my courage, and my very ability to remember who I was. As my steps continued, a memory struck me. A trench, knee-deep in mud, the smell of gunpowder, the screams of falling comrades. Here, in the oppressive silence of this cemetery, I felt the war differently. Here, each grave carried an untold story, a face I might have known but perhaps forgotten by the world. My eyes fixed on an ancient, moss-covered headstone, and I felt a pang of inexplicable connection. It was as if the dead recognized me, as if they knew I wasn't just passing by. I was arriving. And then, the impossible happened. A shadow moved among the graves, something subtle, almost imperceptible. My military instinct made me take a step back, but my curiosity pushed me forward. My every breath seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of the silence. Each footstep resonated like a distant drum, marking the beginning of something I couldn't yet comprehend. Something was about to reveal itself, something that would change my perception of this place and of myself forever. In that instant, I realized I wasn't there by chance. Every stone, every fallen leaf, every abandoned grave had a reason for being there. And I, a veteran scarred by battles no one else remembered, was about to confront something far greater than any conflict I'd ever faced on the battlefield. This was a place where past and present met, where every echo of footsteps became a memory, and where the silence carried truths I perhaps wasn't ready to hear. My heart, still pounding, reminded me that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to continue even in the face of it. I took another step, the wind howling as if warning me, and a sense of inevitability washed over me. Something would happen. Something that would reveal not only what this cemetery hid, but also what I'd carried inside for decades. My name no longer matters, or perhaps it never did to the world around me. But for me, every letter, every sound carried the memory of who I was before the war, before the trenches, before all the blood that stained my hands and my soul. I grew up in a city that never slept, full of voices that were never heard and eyes that never saw. I learned early that life was made of choices and consequences, some small, some devastating. Before donning the uniform, I was just a young man with ordinary dreams. I wanted to travel. I wanted to feel the sea breeze on my face without thinking about death. I wanted to find friends who would stay. But fate, as always, had different plans. At 18, the call came. The promise to serve, to protect, to make a difference seemed heroic at the time, but no one prepared me for the real weight it would carry. The war shaped me in ways that I still can't put into words. I remember the first shot I heard, the first body that fell beside me, the first friend who never returned. Every memory was etched into me, not just as a memory but as an invisible, painful, and permanent tattoo. The smell of gunpowder, the biting cold of early mornings in muddy trenches, the metallic sound of grenades, all of this still lives within me. And sometimes I feel as if I were there again, fighting for survival. When the war ended, I thought everything would be behind me, but I was wrong. The civilian world was unprepared for veterans like me. I arrived home with medals on my chest and invisible wounds in my mind. Applauded by some, ignored by others. I discovered that the battle continued, but now on an invisible field, where the enemies were oblivion, indifference, and loneliness. Many would call it depression, PTSD, but for me, it was simply the continuation of the war, now within me. So I decided to walk to places no one else visited, forgotten places full of silence and shadow, where my mind could wander uninterrupted. That's how I arrived at this abandoned cemetery. Every cracked tombstone, every moss-covered grave seemed to call my name, reminding me that death is universal, but oblivion is a choice. I needed to see, feel, and hear what the living ignored. I carry with me objects from the past. An old battalion insignia, a worn diary with battlefield notes, letters that were never sent. Each of these fragments reminds me of the person I was, of what I fought to protect, and of the lives I can never forget. Some memories bring tears, others a silent rage against a world that often ignores those who gave everything. Here, among abandoned graves, I feel closer to what I was and what I lost. There is a strange beauty in this place, not the beauty you find in manicured gardens, but the beauty of untold history, of lives that passed without recognition. My every step resonates with echoes of battles both internal and external. Sometimes I feel as if the dead here are watching me, whispering, "You survived, but at what cost?" My life now is made up of solitary walks, of conversations with shadows and memories. What happened out there, on the battlefield, shaped my body, but it was the silence of the civilian world that shaped my soul. Every look of contempt I received, every door slammed in my face, every moment of oblivion made me resilient in a way no one who hasn't been through the same would understand. And yet, I feel something calling me to this cemetery. It's not just the need to remember, but to confront. To confront what I was, what I am, and what could have been. Every tombstone seems to ask me, "Do you remember us? Do you remember those who fought and were never remembered?" My past, so full of blood and loss, intertwines with this place, making each step a journey through both time and space. Now, with my weary bones and my mind alert, I understand that this walk is not just for the cemetery, but for myself, for every friend I've lost, for every battle I've survived, for every unshed tear. Every broken stone, every dead tree, every shadow passing in the distance is a reminder that my war continues, but in a different way. Silent, symbolic, and eternal. And it is precisely here, in this forgotten space, that the next challenge awaits me. One that will test not only my physical courage, but the strength of my memory, my sanity, and my very essence as a veteran. As my footsteps echoed over the uneven ground, I felt a presence. It wasn't the comforting presence of the dead who know the weight of life, but something different. Something that brought discomfort, almost a silent aggression. Each headstone seemed to tilt slightly, as if watching me, judging my every move. The wind carried distant, perhaps imaginary sounds, whispers of protest, murmurs of judgment, memories of a world that had always despised me. It was then that I realized the injustice surrounding me. It wasn't an injustice of guns or explosions, but a crueler injustice, the world's disregard, its indifference to forgotten veterans. I, a man who gave my youth, my health, and my sanity, was there, alone, ignored. The city that called me a hero in its commemorative windows didn't remember me when I needed something as simple as respect. A figure appeared in the distance, a hooded figure walking among the graves, its footsteps echoing unnaturally. At first I thought it was a resident of the neighboring neighborhood, someone lost or curious. But as it approached, I noticed something else. A look of contempt, filled with silent judgment. I, a war-scarred veteran, felt like an intruder in my own world. My heart beat faster, not with fear but with indignation. This cemetery, which I believed to be my refuge, now confronted me with the reality I had tried to forget. No one values those who sacrificed everything anymore. The figure began to speak, first in murmurs, then with clear words, filled with contempt. "What are you doing here alone? No one wants you here. Go away." Each syllable pierced my mind like shards of glass. I was vulnerable, yes, but not defeated. My past taught me that courage is not measured only on the front lines, but in how you stand firm in the face of humiliation. As I answered, my words trembled, not from fear, but from suppressed emotion. This place belongs to me as much as anyone else. And if no one cares, I must still walk among those who know what it is to be forgotten. The answer fell like a stone into the silence, but it didn't change the figure's gaze. They continued to stare at me with contempt, as if my own story were worthless. The injustice I felt wasn't limited to that moment. Every step I took in the city after the war, every averted glance, every door slammed in my face, all of it manifested in that instant. It was an emotional battle, silent, but no less real than any combat I'd ever faced. The humiliation came not from guns or explosions, but from the denial of my own worth, from the world's refusal to acknowledge the sacrifice I'd made. My body, though aged, responded instinctively. My mind clung to ancient techniques of discipline, breathing, and focus. I needed to remain calm, but I also needed to decide, would I continue to be a silent spectator to injustice, or would I fight back? On the battlefield, hesitation could cost lives. Here, in the cemetery, it could cost me my dignity. The hooded figure took a step closer, its weight on the ground seeming to increase, as if trying to symbolically crush me. Each second stretched out, an eternity of tension, until a distant sound, perhaps a twig snapping, perhaps a groan from the earth, reminded me that I was not completely alone. There were echoes of lives watching me, even those who had been gone for decades. And then the decision presented itself. Remain silent and suffer, or confront contempt, even if it meant opening old wounds that never healed. War had taught me to fight, to resist, to face the impossible. But this battle was different. There was no physical enemy, only the symbolic weight of oblivion and the devaluation of all I had achieved. As the wind howled among the graves, I felt fury mixed with sadness. Each step forward was an act of resistance, each deep breath an affirmation. I exist, I fought, and my story matters, even if no one else does. The initial injustice, silent and subtle, became fuel. And I knew something bigger was about to happen. A turning point that would not only change the perception of the figure before me, but also reveal the weight of my own presence in this world that insists on forgetting veterans. As my steps continued through the cemetery, I felt the weight of the gaze of those still walking among the graves, living or dead. It didn't matter. The hooded figure who had approached me earlier no longer hid. He approached slowly, deliberately, his gaze carrying something that could only be described as pure contempt. Every word that left his mouth seemed to drip with venom, piercing my chest more than any bullet or explosion I'd ever faced. You think this is some kind of sanctuary? Look at you. Old, tired, lost. A ghost trying to convince himself he still matters. The tone was mocking, and every syllable echoed through the silent cemetery. The trees seemed to bow before his sarcasm. The wind seemed to whisper connivingly. For an instant, I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet, not physically but emotionally. Humiliation came like a slow, heavy wave, momentarily drowning my courage. I had felt contempt before, on the streets, in restaurants, in the averted glances when my uniform or medals appeared. But nothing compared to being underestimated here, in this space I believed to be one of remembrance and respect. Every gesture, every cynical smile from the hooded figure was like an invisible blade digging into my deepest scars. My body responded with tension, my muscles stiffened, but my mind fought not to give in to despair. The whispers began. They weren't audible voices, but sensations, echoes of contempt from an entire society that ignored veterans like me. You're just an old man. Nothing more than a piece of the past no one wants to remember. Every unseen word, every silent judgment transformed the cemetery into a stage of humiliation, and I stood at the center, vulnerable, alone, exposed. The hooded figure advanced, his boots dragging across the dry leaf-covered ground, the creaking sound mocking every battle I had faced. And to think you fought for something. For whom? For a country that forgets you the moment your hands stop holding a gun? I felt a pang of anger, but also a deep sadness. It was as if every lost friend, every battlefield, every held-back tear was being trampled on in that moment. My entire life, my memories, my sacrifice, condensed into a look of contempt. The silence of the cemetery seemed to conspire against me, amplifying the humiliation. The tombstones, the dead trees, even the cold wind. Everything seemed like silent judges validating the cruelty of that moment. I wanted to scream, to draw attention, to prove that my story mattered. But something inside me reminded me that true courage manifests itself in subtle, often silent ways. Then I realized the effect of the humiliation. My physical body remained immobile. But my mind was alive, analyzing, remembering, planning. Every gesture of contempt, every cruel word, became fuel for something greater. The hooded figure believed he had diminished me, that he had erased my dignity. But every veteran knows that true dignity lies not in the hands of the beholder, but in the inner strength of those who survive. I felt my past merge with the present. I remembered trenches, night battles, the fear and courage shared with men who became blood brothers. I remembered the value of sacrifice, of commitment to something greater than myself. And even humiliated, I realized that this public scorn, though painful, could not erase who I am. My breathing became deep, measured. My heart, racing, reminded me that I was still alive, that I could still act. The humiliation was not the end, it was a test. A test of what defined me as a veteran, as a survivor, as a man who carried invisible scars and stories no one dared hear. Every mockery, every look of disdain, transformed into a silent force, preparing me for the upheaval that was to come. As the figure retreated slightly, believing his victory was complete, I felt within me the seed of something that would change everything. The humiliation had done its job, showing how underestimated I could be, but also revealing the strength that still burned within me, ready to emerge when no one was looking, not even those who judged. I hadn't expected this to happen. Not in that forgotten cemetery, surrounded by silence and shadows, nor before the figure I believed had reduced me to nothing. But something changed in the next instant. A stronger breeze blew between the graves, carrying with it an ancient smell, gunpowder, damp earth, and the perfume of memories I hadn't known could still emerge. The hooded figure instinctively recoiled, as if sensing something beyond its control. Suddenly, I felt a more intense, more alive presence, one that seemed to emerge from the very ground. My military instinct, honed by years of war, alerted me to something that wasn't human. But instead of fear, I felt a strange, almost symbolic connection with the place and those who rested there. An invisible energy seemed to pull me, guiding me to a specific point in the cemetery. And then, the impossible happened. The hooded figure's shadow moved erratically, as if dominated by a force I couldn't comprehend. It was at that moment that I realized the cemetery wasn't just a physical space. It was an archive of memories, a silent battlefield where each grave bore the truth of forgotten lives. And I, a veteran scarred by conflict, had the right to claim my place there. A metallic sound caught my attention. An object had fallen from a nearby headstone. As I approached, I recognized the gleam of a medal. Not mine, but that of someone who shared the same pain, the same courage. The emotional impact gave me unexpected strength. The hooded figure tried to interrupt, but his words now sounded weak, almost useless against the energy permeating the place. My veteran past manifested itself not as a painful memory, but as moral authority. I remembered the times I had led comrades under fire, the decisions that saved lives or led to death, and I realized that this experience conferred something on me that no one there could dispute: legitimacy to occupy my space even if the world tried to erase me. Then, something symbolic happened. A nearby tombstone, which had fallen over, began to shift, as if acknowledging my presence. The wind carried leaves and dust, forming a path that seemed to guide me. Every step I took was different now, no longer hesitant or burdened with shame, but determined, full of purpose. The hooded figure, sensing the change, hesitated, its arrogance dissipating before the silent strength emanating from me. My gaze fell on a larger tombstone, covered in moss, with names nearly erased by time, and suddenly I understood the complete reversal. This place, which had once seemed merely a refuge of solitude, was a stage of symbolic recognition. The dead somehow validated my presence, and the hooded figure could not deny what it saw. a veteran who had faced unimaginable horrors, now steadfast and dignified, even in the face of public scorn. The silence of the cemetery changed its tone. It was no longer oppressive, but charged with hushed reverence. Every stone, every dead tree, every shadow seemed to bow slightly, as if the world itself were acknowledging my truth. The hooded figure retreated completely, unable to maintain its posture of contempt. For the first time, I felt that my past struggles, my sacrifice and my scars, both visible and invisible, were respected, even if only symbolically. It was a moment of epiphany. The turning point came not with applause or traditional public recognition, but with the silent validation of the cemetery itself. I realized that justice and respect do not depend on the approval of strangers, but on the alignment between our inner courage and the memory of those who came before. Every step I took from that point carried a new certainty. I still had power, even if invisible, even if symbolic, and no one could take it from me. The hooded figure disappeared into the shadows, but the sense of victory remained. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't superiority. It was the manifestation of something much deeper, my ability to transcend humiliation, to convert contempt into strength, and to transform a moment of rejection into a silent proof of dignity. The abandoned cemetery, which had once seemed a place of oblivion, now became witness to something that time could not erase: my presence, my story, and my truth. The air around me shifted. There was no applause, no words of recognition from the living, but something far more powerful revealed itself: the silent justice of the cemetery itself. Every headstone, every broken stone, every twisted tree seemed to now align subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if the entire forgotten space offered me a silent reverence. The hooded figure who had previously humiliated me now stood motionless, almost stunned, before something I could neither control nor deny. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a sensation I hadn't experienced in decades. Validation. Not from the world that ignored me, not from the voices that fell silent in the face of my sacrifice, but from something greater, something symbolic, that reminded me that true justice isn't always public. Here, among the dead and oblivion, my story was recognized by the only audience that truly mattered: those who understood what it means to fight, to lose, and still remain whole. My hands, trembling with emotion, touched a nearby headstone. The moss beneath my fingers seemed to whisper stories of comrades in arms, friends who had fallen, whose memories the world had forgotten. For an instant, I felt their presence beside me, as if they were saying, "You are not forgotten. We remember." The sense of recognition was so tangible I could almost hear invisible heartbeats synchronized with mine, each pulse reaffirming my worth and dignity. The hooded figure who had once held contempt now seemed to understand something beyond his limited judgment. His eyes, once hard and full of sarcasm, softened. Perhaps he realized that true authority lies not in fear or humiliation, but in persistence, in quiet courage, and in the integrity that remains even in the face of public scorn. I didn't need to say anything. My body, my posture, my firm, resolute steps spoke for me. The wind carried leaves and small stones, swirling around me in a slow whirlwind, as if the cemetery itself celebrated my right to be there. Each step I took toward the exit was no longer weighed down by the oppressive silence, but lightened by the certainty that my presence had meaning. The humiliation that had once consumed me transformed into a test of endurance and resilience. I didn't need human recognition. I needed only the validation that came from within, reinforced by the energy of this place and the spirit of those who had passed. As I walked down the aisle of graves, I noticed something curious. An ancient headstone, almost faded by time, seemed to subtly stand out. It bore military symbols that somehow reflected my own past. I felt an immediate, almost supernatural connection. It was as if that piece of stone spoke to me, telling me that my story would not be forgotten, that my sacrifice mattered, and that, despite human contempt, true justice existed, even if silent, symbolic, invisible to the eyes of most. Recognition came not from words, but from presence, from energy, from silent acceptance. I felt that every battle I had faced, every held-back tear, every sleepless night and painful memory, had culminated in that moment. The cemetery, once merely a refuge of solitude and memory, became witness to my intact dignity. True justice didn't require others to understand, only that I recognize my own worth. As I left the cemetery, I realized the hooded figure was no longer there. But the sense of respect, however symbolic, remained with me. For the first time in many years, I felt that my presence, my past, and my experiences had found recognition, not from the human world, but from something greater, something invisible and eternal. Justice, I realized, doesn't need an audience to be complete. It manifests itself when the truth of our being is affirmed, when courage, even solitary, is recognized in its purest form. As the rusty gate closed behind me, I felt the weight of memory lift, and an unexpected clarity emerged. Every step I took inside, every moment of humiliation, every shadow of contempt, now transformed into something greater. Proof that the veteran that I am, marked by war, and the silence of the world, still possess dignity, strength, and recognition, even if only by those who truly understand what it means to fight and survive. As I walked through the cemetery, I felt a mixture of relief and heaviness, as if every stone, every dead tree, and every grave carried pieces of my own story. There, surrounded by the profound silence, I began to realize that this place was not just a physical cemetery, but a map of my own mind. Each headstone represented memories I'd tried to forget, internal battles that still haunted me, losses I carried like invisible scars. My mind wandered back to the days before the war. I was just a young man with simple dreams, but life, relentless, pushed me down a path that would change everything. I remember the long nights I lay in bed wondering if my friends would return, if I would return in one piece, if I would still be able to recognize my own reflection. Each memory of those days brought me a pang of pain, but also a sense of connection to the man I still am. The war left deep scars, not just on my body but on my soul. I saw friends fall, blood brothers torn from me in moments that felt eternal. Each death was a constant reminder that life is fragile and that the world often ignores those who sacrifice everything. Here, among the dead, I felt I could finally speak to them in silence, reflect on every choice, every moment I survived while others were gone. There were also moments of regret, memories of decisions that could have saved lives but didn't. But even with the guilt, I realized that my presence here was a way to reconcile it all. Walking among the graves was more than a physical act. It was a ritual of connecting with every memory I carried, every friend I lost, every internal battle I still fought every day. The cemetery taught me that emotional connection doesn't have to be verbal. It doesn't take someone saying, "I recognize you," for the feeling to exist. The stones, the trees, the cold wind, even the dancing shadows among the graves. All of this was a silent testament to what I'd lived through, what I'd overcome, and what I still carry with me. It was a constant presence that reminded me of the dignity of my own existence, of the strength that resides in those who face horrors and carry on. As my fingers ran over worn tombstones, I felt every detail: faded names, dates eroded by time, military symbols that resisted the erosion of memory. Each element carried a story, and as I touched them, I felt as if I were connecting my own narrative to theirs. I wasn't just walking through the cemetery, I was engaging with the past, acknowledging pains, achievements, and memories the world had forgotten. There was also a sense of communion with the present. Even alone, I felt something greater was there, something that transcended life and death. It was as if my every breath was intertwined with the breaths of all those who had passed, creating an invisible web of remembrance and recognition. Every step, every pause, every glance around reinforced the certainty that my life and my experiences were not empty, even if no one alive cared anymore. Emotions flowed like waves, mixing sadness, relief, pent-up anger, gratitude, and respect. I realized that the pain of war didn't need to be hidden. It could be honored, transformed into reflection and learning. And here, among the dead and their forgotten stories, I felt I could finally embrace every part of myself. The veteran who survived, the man who suffered, and the spirit that still silently fought. Finally, I understood that true emotional connection is internal. It doesn't depend on applause, public recognition, or outside understanding. It's a dialogue between who you were, who you are, and who you've become. Walking through that abandoned cemetery not only brought back painful memories, but also allowed me to reconcile my past with the present. Every memory, every shadow, every silence became part of a larger narrative. My narrative, one that no one could erase. As the wind blew, carrying leaves and dust from ancient tombstones, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the absence of pain, but the acceptance of it. Every battle I'd faced, every lost friend, every moment of humiliation and contempt now made sense in a new light. I was connected with myself, with those who have passed, with time, and with the memory that persists, even in the face of oblivion. The silence of the cemetery became almost suffocating. My every step seemed amplified by the emptiness around me. And for the first time, I felt I was not just facing the past or the memory of those who had passed, but something alive. Something that would test my courage in a way no military battle ever had. A strange, almost electric sensation ran down my spine. Something was approaching. Or perhaps it had always been there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The cold wind increased in intensity, dragging dry leaves and small twigs across the ground. The hooded figure that had once humiliated me was back. But now there were no words. Only a menacing, silent presence that seemed to absorb every nuance of the environment. My muscles tensed, my war memories surfaced like an internal arsenal ready to be activated. But this was not a battle with conventional weapons. It was a psychological, symbolic battle, where every choice, every gesture, carried the weight of my own dignity and sanity. The figure advanced slowly, step by step, each movement calculated to test my reaction. I could sense the intention behind the silence, to provoke fear, to shatter the trust I had rebuilt throughout the cemetery. But instead of hesitating, I took a deep breath and allowed my war experiences to flow. Every trench, every lost friend, every explosion, and every endless night reminded me that true courage arises not from the absence of fear, but from the decision to face it. Suddenly the ground beneath my feet trembled slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to make me realize that the cemetery was not just a static space. It responded to my presence. Shadows lengthened, trees leaned, as if the entire environment were participating in a silent choreography. I felt the weight of collective memory pressing down on me. Every grave, every tombstone, every buried story seemed to give me strength, and at the same time challenge me to prove my worth once again. The hooded figure raised an arm, and the gesture seemed to command a symbolic authority over the place. But in the next instant, I felt the internal upheaval. Something within me awakened. It wasn't just survival or pride, it was a profound recognition of my own journey. Every scar, every loss, every step that had brought me there converged into a single purpose: not to retreat, not to give in, to affirm my presence as a veteran, as a survivor, and as a human being worthy of remembrance. The wind carried a strange sound, not human, not earthly, as if the earth itself and the dead around me were breathing with me. My heart raced, not with panic, but with heightened tension, aware that this was the culmination of my entire emotional journey in that cemetery. The hooded figure seemed to realize it could no longer intimidate me. Its symbolic power over me weakened, but the tension still didn't dissipate. The climax was in the air, palpable, almost suffocating, and demanded of me a final display of inner strength. I closed my eyes for a moment, connecting with every memory, every lost friend, every battle fought. When I opened them, I felt a startling clarity. I didn't need to attack, nor defend myself. The simple act of standing firm, of advancing through the cemetery with dignity, was enough. Each step became a silent declaration, each breath an invisible manifesto of resistance and honor. The hooded figure, perhaps understanding the magnitude of the moment, hesitated. I was at the epicenter of maximum tension, not in a physical conflict, but in a confrontation of meaning, courage, and truth. That moment lasted what felt like hours, each second charged with anticipation, each shadow moving as if pulsing in response to my presence. And then, without warning, the air around me seemed to give way. The wind died, the shadows grew still, and a sense of silent victory spread through the cemetery. I had passed the test. There was no applause, no human voices cheering, but something much deeper manifested. The certainty that even in the face of contempt, humiliation, and loneliness, my courage and dignity would remain unshaken. The climax required no external spectacle. It resolved itself in my own consciousness, in the recognition that I had met the height of emotional and symbolic challenge and emerged whole, unbreakable. As I left the heart of the cemetery, I felt something different inside me. It wasn't complete relief, nor a traditional sense of victory, but a quiet clarity, a gradually lifting weight, and a deep understanding of who I am. Each step across the uneven ground was now accompanied by a heightened awareness. I had traversed not just a physical space, but an emotional and symbolic journey that allowed me to see my own scars in a new way. The shadows, once menacing, now seemed to gently incline, as if acknowledging my passage. The wind, which had carried whispers of humiliation and judgment, became lighter, almost as if the cemetery, a silent witness to my story, was giving me back something the world had tried to deny me, a sense of belonging and recognition, even if symbolic. Every headstone touched, every grave observed, seemed to tell me that my presence there was not only accepted, but validated by those who understand the weight of memory and experience. As I walked among the twisted trees and worn stones, I realized how my mind had changed. Before, every step carried anxiety, fear of judgment, painful memories of rejection. Now, my steps carried purpose. I understood that every experience of contempt and humiliation I faced outside the cemetery had not been in vain. Everything I had experienced had prepared me for that moment. The instant I could finally transform pain into silent recognition, humiliation into strength, and loneliness into symbolic connection. Even though no one alive was there to see it, my dignity was restored. I realized that the true consequences of what I experienced in that cemetery were not just internal. They were beginning to be reflected in how I would relate to the world from now on. Courage manifests itself not only in great, visible, heroic acts, but in small decisions. Remaining true in the face of injustice, recognizing one's own strength, and honoring those who came before us. The cemetery, with its cracked headstones and withered trees, became a mirror of my own life. Each stone symbolized challenges overcome. Each shadow carried lessons learned. Each silence resonated with stories that needed to be remembered. The most profound consequence was the realization that, even in the darkest places, even in the face of public scorn or the world's indifference, there is still room for dignity, symbolic justice, and true emotional connection. As I walked through the rusted gate, I felt something had shifted within me physically as well. My shoulders, hunched by decades of pain and struggle, seemed a little taller. My step, once hesitant at times, was now firm. The walk through the cemetery not only reconciled me with my past, but also renewed my sense of self. I didn't need the recognition of the living to validate my worth. It existed within me, strengthened by the experience I had lived in that space charged with memory and symbolism. Even outside the cemetery, every memory of that place continued to follow me. The sense of silent justice, of invisible recognition accompanied me. It was as if the wind that blew through the graves continued to whisper that my story would not be forgotten, that my sacrifice and courage remained intact. Every glance from the outside world, every gesture of indifference, could no longer touch me in the same way. I had found the inner proof of my own dignity, something no one could take away from me. And as I walked back to the city that had so often ignored me, I noticed a subtle but profound transformation. The war had shaped my body. The memories had shaped my mind. But it was this symbolic experience in the cemetery that shaped my soul. The consequences of that moment were not only emotional but existential. I was ready to face the world with the certainty of who I was, with the strength I carried within me, and with the eternal connection to stories that could never be erased. The cemetery taught me that life is full of silent battles, and that every act of courage, no matter how small, leaves deep marks. My journey through that abandoned space did not end in fear or humiliation. It ended with understanding, symbolic justice, and a renewed sense of my own worth. And even if no one realizes it, even if the world remains indifferent, I know the truth. I survived, I faced it, and my story matters, to me and to all those who share the memory of what was lost and what was gained. As I walk away from the cemetery, I realize that each step I took there was more than a walk among tombstones and shadows. It was a deep dive into the essence of what it means to be human, to survive and maintain dignity in the face of contempt and indifference. The moral of this story lies not in applause or public recognition, but in the ability to confront one's own scars, embrace the past, and transform pain into strength. The world may forget, it may ignore, but the truth of our experiences remains. The war, which once shaped my body and mind, continues to reside in my soul, silent and permanent. But post-war life has taught me that the true battle is not fought only on the battlefield, but in the small, everyday decisions, resisting disdain, walking despite scorn, remembering one's self-worth when no one else does. The abandoned cemetery, with its worn tombstones and twisted trees, became a metaphor for the world around me. Indifferent, often cruel, yet still full of hidden lessons for those who observe carefully. The echo of my own footsteps, which once sounded like emptiness and loneliness, has now become a constant reminder of presence, persistence, and resilience. Every grave, every shadow, every forgotten detail taught me that memory is a form of justice, not always recognized by the outside world, but powerful, silent, capable of reaffirming who we are when everything around us tries to erase us. The moral of the story is clear. Do not allow the contempt or indifference of others to define your worth. It lies in your courage to continue, in your dignity to exist, and in your ability to honor what has been gained and lost. I also realize that reflection is inevitable. Every veteran, every survivor of conflict carries stories that the world often ignores. But these stories are no less important. They shape the silent society that walks between chaos and memory, that faces invisible pain and yet persists. The moral that emerges from my journey through the cemetery is that strength lies not only in survival, but in the profound understanding of the value of what has been experienced, what has been lost, and what remains within us. The abandoned cemetery taught me something vital. True justice is not always visible. It does not need human witnesses, applause, or social recognition. Symbolic justice, the kind that resonates in consciousness, connects us with our own truth and reminds us that survival is not just physical, but emotional and spiritual. Every step I took there reinforced an eternal lesson. No matter how much the world tries to forget you, you can still assert yourself, you can still honor your story, and you can still find dignity in your own actions. As the wind whispers through the trees and dry leaves dance around, I understand that morality extends beyond me. For all who face contempt, loneliness, or injustice, the message is clear. Strength is not defined by external recognition, but by the ability to remain whole, to resist, and to transform pain into learning. The cemetery, with all its dark symbolism, taught me that connecting with one's own history, with those who came before, and with the memories we carry, is the greatest form of justice there is. Reflecting on all this, I realize that life goes on, but experience leaves indelible marks, like silent scars that remind us not only of what we suffered, but of what we achieved. The moral of the story for me is an invitation to introspection and action. Honor your past, recognize your worth, even if no one else notices, and keep your dignity intact, for it is the only form of justice no one can deny. Finally, as the horizon opens and the dim afternoon light touches the cemetery gate, I understand that the lesson goes beyond a moment or a place. It's a universal truth. Courage, resilience, and dignity don't depend on applause, but on the depth of our connection to our own history and the memories we carry. And for me, a veteran who walked among the dead and found strength in silence, this moral is eternal. A reminder that even in abandonment and shadows, true justice and recognition can be found if we have the courage to look within.